Hello, this is Shannon Foster, and I'm here today sharing with you Understanding Leadership, Listening to Women's Voices in Higher Education. The number of women ready for leadership positions in higher education continues to grow. In addition, universities increasingly look to embrace collaborative models for solutions to a competitive 21st century market, often turning to frameworks like transformational or servant leadership to inform leadership development programs. While on the surface it seems that implementing these models intuitively offers women a leadership advantage, this is not apparent in the advancement of women to senior leadership levels. In part, this may be due to a lack of women's voice in contemporary leadership theory and research. For example, BIRMA 2016 reports a shortage of empirical studies that focus on women's experiences. In addition to empirical work, CARC 2004 believes research using non-traditional methods could contribute to the development of a richer and more inclusive range of transformational theory. And finally, Ford 2005 highlights the need for qualitative studies that give voice to women's experiences and furthers the call for a social and contextually specific definition of leadership. In other words, there are as many different types of leadership styles as there are leaders, followers, and organizations in the world. This slide presents the thesis that I will use for this paper. Research on women in leadership is a contested realm with many different perspectives. This paper highlights 3 common misconceptions put forward in the field of women in leadership, which serve to placate advocates engaged in the women in leadership conversation. These topics include contemporary leadership theories, the gender advantage, and the pipeline argument. The need for further research through the voices of women underpins each discussion. Also, I would like to believe a sound argument is made for understanding individual leadership experiences and the context in which those experiences occur, with the hopes to inform leadership development efforts that are specific to women and their unique voices. Before launching into the misconceptions, I want to provide some contextual information to frame the discussion. This slide represents women in leadership, the ideal. In the U.S., women exceed men in higher education degree attainment at every level. Gibson and colleagues, 2017, report that females received 57% of bachelor's, 59.9% of master's, and 51.8% of doctorate degrees based on National Center for Education 2016 statistics. So, armed with education, women are also entering the workforce in record numbers. One could say the talent pool for female leaders is quite rich and abundant, ready to offer a unique perspective for organizations in the 21st century. At the same time that this is occurring and adding to the ideal situation, society is in a shift between industrial and post-industrial views of leadership. Words that describe industrial leadership include positional, transactional, merit, control, power, and authority. The post-industrial view, on the other hand, is value-centered and process-oriented. Language of this paradigm focuses on relationship building, process orientation, connectedness, and an ethics of care and concern. In practice, then, leadership development programs with the post-industrial lens are beginning to focus on collaborative models that ask leaders to divest of power in order to capitalize on the strengths of their teams. I'd like to reiterate that. They ask leaders to divest of power in order to capitalize on the strengths of their teams. This is very important. This is where the female advantage should play a role in the post-industrial or contemporary styles of leadership. As shared by CARC 2004, a woman's way of leading and their relational skills and intuitive mode of thinking are not deficiencies to be overcome, but advantages for corporate effectiveness. It seems women should thrive in the world of post-industrial leadership styles that call for collaboration and relationship building. However, research shows that women still lag behind men in pay, promotion, benefits, and rewards. Progress made by women in the workforce has slowed considerably in the last decade. For example, 4% of Fortune 500 CEO and Fortune 1000 positions were represented by women in 2016. and they hold just 8% of the top earning jobs. Gibson and colleagues 2017 shared that in S&P 500 companies, women represent less than 1/3 of executive and senior level positions, 1/5 of board seats, and 5% of CEOs. In the arena of higher education, women make up 30% of college presidents, and the 2017 American College President Study reports another slow evolving snapshot of the demographics of higher education leadership. So despite advances in mandates and policies that prevent sex discrimination, a gender gap in the workforce remains. This would suggest that barriers to women's advancement into senior levels of leadership are subtle, complex, and go beyond blatant discrimination. We're going to look at some of these complexities in greater detail. Specifically, in the first argument, we will try to understand if organizations that exist in hierarchy, power, and bounded rationality offer environments where contemporary leadership theory can be implemented in its full spirit, or if in these environments this theory simply serves as an ideological smokescreen. As stated on the last slide, women's advancement to high-level leadership roles and the unique challenges they undergo is quite complex. One problem relates to the development of contemporary leadership theories, which were fashioned through the views of white men, with no input to women's leadership experiences. An examination of early contemporary leadership research, like the creation of transformational leadership theory, actually shows they were sponsored by male-dominated groups like the military, Xerox, and Exxon. So language used in the studies were directed toward men and used male pronouns. Also, the research samples were overwhelmingly narrow in their demographics, consisting of predominantly white men. However, the findings were generalized to men and women. In addition, in another overview, Ford 2005 found a substantial amount is framed within the positivistic epistemology. This approach, quantitative in nature, asserts that the truth is out there, with the goal of developing theory that describes one true leadership style that, when applied, leads to organizational success. This has created a view of a leader as someone who, without help, has the vision to guide the organization through times of change and crisis. In fact, if you do a Google search of the greatest 21st century leaders, you will return over 6 million pages, with some of the most commonly named individuals appearing, like Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Elon Musk of SpaceX, and of course Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. So why did I place a photo of Superman on this slide? Because it would appear, based on a simple Google search, that the individualistic great man approaches, where the leader plays the role of a hero, put forward in the 1930s and 40s view of leadership, still permeates a portion of the leadership narrative. However, despite this predominant narrative, advocates of contemporary theory point to the descriptive language used to help leaders embody the approach, and they conclude this language is gender neutral. I will provide one example here, but there are others within servant and shared or distributed leadership. The example we will consider for gender neutral language is found in transformational leadership, which focuses on follower autonomy and growth, so members feel empowered to act on behalf of the organization. This feeling of empowerment is cultivated and directed toward collective action of common goals and organization vision. As such, transformational leadership calls for an organization to be more collaborative, flexible, and team-oriented. This is manifest, as you can see from this picture, through a leader who is a role model. They mentor and guide followers to become better versions of themselves, which ultimately benefits the organization. Admittedly, the language of contemporary or post-industrial styles of leadership presents itself as gender neutral, meaning collaboration, cooperation, and community can be embraced by men or women. However, while theory language appears gender neutral, the organizations that adopt it may be anything but that. In fact, more often than not, organizations are gendered in culture. So a disconnect occurs when an organization holds gendered underlying assumptions, but they espouse vision through a contemporary leadership framework. And when this takes place, theory then simply serves as ideology, rather than a systemic approach to leadership that is implemented in the full spirit of the theory. There are three underlying constructs that I highlight in my paper to support the appearance of gendered underlying assumptions, and they are bounded rationality, the utilization of power as a commodity, and the promotion of meritocracy. In essence, these three concepts incentivize agentic characteristics like assertiveness, competitiveness, and independence, and these traits are typically described as culturally masculine and are, as a result, socially bestowed upon men. Bounded rationality encourages the use of systems like a hierarchical structure, which are put in place to control choice and encourage more effective decision making. So the question becomes, if an organization uses hierarchical structures to control choice and maintain bounded rationality, how can shared or distributed leadership exist within them? In terms of power as a commodity, Rao and Kelleher link this concept to hierarchical structure, which from a patriarchal lens is viewed as a limited commodity held by few to control the choices of many. So I feel this further highlights the difficulty of enacting transformational, servant, or distributed leadership within an organization that uses a hierarchical structure to maintain the patriarchal view of power. It may be argued that true shared leadership requires a divestment of power among all members and a flatter organizational structure where the leader and the follower become more difficult to differentiate. Moving on to argument number 2, another potential barrier for women attempting to advance to leadership position relates to gender stereotypes. What are the female stereotypes? History and culture dictate socially ascribed traits for women like kindness, empathy, gentleness, and sensitivity, whereas men are socially ascribed characteristics like confidence, independence, self-directedness, and assertiveness. In the organizational sense, then, male stereotypes are more closely associated with successful leadership than female stereotypes, and society seems to more easily credit men with leadership ability than women. Men are seen as the prototypical take-charge person and granted the label of a, quote, natural leader. In addition to this, Eagly and Carwell, 2002, report that male gendered roles are not only preferred as leader characteristics, but female stereotypes are often seen as ineffective leader qualities. This places women in what is known as the double bind, which occurs when followers and colleagues expect women to act in a communal and relationship-oriented manner, while also holding underlying assumptions that successful leaders embody agentic characteristics that produce organizational success. Then, when women display agentic traits like self-confidence, ambition, and dominance, they are seen unfavorably or deemed, quote, trying to act like a man, which further requires them to temper this style with softer female typical behaviors. Either way, women risk being seen as too soft or too hard, and they suffer the perception of followers and colleagues to, quote, never get it quite right. The question then becomes, do women in leadership roles act within gender normative behaviors or fall in line with expected leadership role behaviors? On the other side of the gender stereotype argument, advocates believe women have a leadership advantage due to their gender and inherent traits. For example, and as we previously discussed in Transformational Leadership, Eagly 2007 defines a good leader as someone who is future-oriented, fosters commitment, and encourages members to contribute creatively to the organization. Leaders act as a mentor or a coach rather than a dictator. This seems to coincide with the above-mentioned female gender stereotypes, as women embody traits like kindness, empathy, and relatedness over male stereotypical traits like independence and competitiveness. In fact, there are studies that show women embrace leadership styles that make them somewhat more effective than men. Based on a meta-analysis by Eagly 2007, they found that female leaders embrace beliefs and act more in line with transformational leadership than men. The argument also has support within the feminist gender resistance movement, which advocates for the female advantage in transformational leadership. This view is utilized in research to provide evidence that women possess valuable traits required of effective leadership, with an overarching goal to encourage more women to seek senior leadership roles. So what's wrong with the gender advantage? It is necessary to point out that while the gender advantage is situated to support women in leadership literature, it also serves to further essentialize women, which may relegate them to act or lead in ways that do not feel authentic. No matter the intention of the gender advantage argument, it does not eliminate organizational or follower bias. Rather, it furthers the stereotypes that place women in a double bind. In other words, despite the so-called advantage, women must still stay within a narrow band of acceptable behavior. One of my favorite quotes you'll see on this slide is from the research of Elmers, Rink, Dirks, and Ryan. They state, conversely, the expectations that women are particularly good at social emotional leadership relates to benevolent sexism, as this conveys that female leaders should display stereotypically feminine leadership behaviors. Together, these beliefs and expectations put female leaders in an impossible position where they are damned if they do and damned if they do not. In addition, when researchers and advocates of this view essentialize women with a, quote, gender advantage, they assume all women share similar traits, which are consistent and unchanging. So in addition to furthering stereotypes, a woman's identity is limited to her gender, rather than recognizing the complex intersections of class, age, sexual orientation, religion, nation, and ethnicity. I also believe this view lacks the complexity to recognize that leaders do not exist in a vacuum, and acceptance of women as leaders within an organization is largely dependent on the followers' value system. In organizations that maintain a social identity of the prototypical leader as think manager, think male, gender advantage is a moot point. Overall, organizations that do not challenge gender stereotypes from any point in the gender spectrum, essentializing through concepts like the gender advantage, will remain detrimental for women because it sets the stage to maintain the status quo. Moving on to argument number 3, is it a pipeline or a pipe dream? In the 21st century, it seems that women are moving up and barriers are coming down. In 2016, we experienced the first opportunity to vote for a woman president. Media reports indicate that, quote, women have the right stuff, and, quote, men could become losers in a global economy that values mental power over might. In higher education, the feeling is the same, that full equality is within grasp for the first time in history. Women now account for about 50% of assistant professors, 38% of associate professors, and 24% of full professors. In addition, as we mentioned previously, women hold about 30% of college and university presidents. With these statistics in mind, it is assumed that filling the leadership pipeline will take care of the remaining issues of gender inequality, meaning if enough women are in position to move into leadership roles, then the rest will resolve naturally, and the increasing statistics will continue to rise. However, Kellerman and Rhode, 2017, refer to the pipeline as a pipe dream. In fact, they report the number of women in positions of leadership has declined, stagnated, or remained despairingly low in the last few years, especially in consideration of women graduating with higher education degrees and being placed in positions ready to advance. Why does this occur? Kellerman and Rhode, 2017, indicate the pipeline theory assumes two key factors. First, if women and men have the same qualification, once women are granted access, they will rise to the top just as men do. Second, it presumes an absence of gender bias, a lack of stereotypes to get in the way of women's career advancement. And finally, organizational structures are designed to work as well for women as they do for men. In fact, examining the pipeline concept in relation to current career advancement statistics for women, you may question whether or not it serves as a way to maintain the status quo. It tells women that if they are patient enough, progress is inevitable, and that as more and more women advance, our time to lead is right around the corner. However, as previously mentioned, the groundswell of women graduating and entering lower-level positions is not resulting in the exponential growth you might expect. In fact, advancement remains elusive. Advocates of the pipeline point to successful women who have reached the highest echelons as examples to emulate. Here we have Sheryl Sandberg, who wrote the famous book Lean In, to encourage women to, quote, seek high-level corporate jobs and persevere until they reach the top. According to Bell Hooks, mass media, along with Sandberg, is telling us that by sheer strength of will and staying power, any woman so inclined can work hard and climb the corporate ladder all the way to the top. In fact, to quote Sandberg again, conditions for all women will improve when there are more women in leadership roles, giving strong and powerful voice to their need and concerns. In essence, Sandberg is asking women to hang in there, and if you maintain commitment to the organization and other women in higher levels of leadership, they will maintain a commitment to you. In fact, we know this simply is not true. So why is it not as simple as the pipeline? Relates to something called the queen bee phenomenon, which describes a woman pursuing individual success in a male-dominated work setting. So for an image, you can conjure up a police department, a law firm, the military, which all tend to be male-dominated fields, and imagine the women working inside of them. According to Dirks van Laar and Ellemers 2016, the queen bee phenomena occurs when women adjust to the masculine culture by assimilating with agentic characteristics while distancing themselves from other women. They do this in one of three ways, typically. 1, they present themselves more like men. 2, they physically and psychologically distance themselves from other women. And 3, they endorse and legitimize the current gender hierarchy. There are two important concepts to remember regarding the queen bee phenomenon. 1, it is not necessarily a source of gender bias. Rather, it is a response to gender discrimination and identity threat that women in leadership roles in some organizations may experience. It is also a gradient response, where some women show queen bee characteristics more than others, and the responses may be contextual, meaning they may respond in this way in some situations, but not in others. Ultimately, research shows that the phenomena occurs when women experience some type of social identity threat in the work environment, where they are negatively valued or stereotyped. And in fact, Dirks and colleagues report that the phenomena is not an inevitable response for women in high-level leadership positions. However, the queen bee phenomenon does serve to maintain the status quo, and it may actually be more detrimental to women in the end. First, by promoting a woman into power position does indicate the glass ceiling can be broken, which may mitigate outright appearance of gender discrimination. Second, if a woman feels she must distance herself from another woman, she may choose to evaluate a female subordinate more harshly, which is seen as more credible because they are evaluating another woman. As stated by Dirks and colleagues 2016, to quote them, in order to improve gender diversity, companies need to do more than simply parachute a couple of token women into positions of power. Instead, companies should scrutinize their organizational culture and examine whether gender diversity would indeed be welcomed. So going back to Sheryl Sandberg's idea that women should just, quote, lean in, we can see that the nature of women moving up through the pipeline is more complicated than she may have outlined. In conclusion, this presentation has provided an overview of the subtle and complex issues that face women who wish to serve as leaders. First, they must work within leadership theories that were designed based on the views of white men. Second, they must contend with a myriad of gender stereotypes that tell them they should be succeeding in 21st century leadership just based on the language of the contemporary leadership styles. Third, they are being told that as long as they get the right degree and work hard enough, that eventually there will be enough women in high-level positions to pave the way and bring them along. And we know this simply is not being seen as discussed in the pipeline argument. So why is this important? Aside from the ethics of equity standpoint, from a human resource view, as more women enter the workforce, it will become imperative to understand leadership from their perspective. It seems intuitive that as the number of women in the workforce increases, so does the opportunity to engage with a greater number of diverse thinkers that allows organizations to draw upon a deeper pool of talent. Ultimately, it behooves organizations to further understand the depth and breadth of varying leader perspectives with the intention to remain competitive in the 21st century workforce. And as we have seen in this presentation, leadership literature shows us that women develop, process, and engage in leadership very differently, which includes taking into account complex intersectional identities. I included a picture of a labyrinth on this slide as a metaphor for how women navigate their existence as leaders, a complex role full of difficult choices. And to quote one of my favorite authors, Bell Hooks, she says, "Importantly, whether feminist or not, we all need to remember that visionary feminist goal, which is not of women running the world as is, but women doing our part to change the world so that freedom and justice, the opportunity to have optimal well-being, can be equally shared by everyone." It is my belief that women are on the precipice of owning our varied and complex leadership identities, but society must do its part to create environments where this can happen. And it is my hope that listening to the voices of women within the context of their leadership experiences is a step in this direction.